Hello, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be ranking every single season of Super Sentai that I've seen, which is Jetman to Boonboomger. I've also seen both seasons of Akibaranger, so I'll talk about those at the end. So without further ado, this is my ranking of every single season of Super Sentai that I've seen. Coming in at last place, number 34, is Kyoryu Sentai Zyuohger, and this is just a really boring and generic season. The characters aren't that great. I don't really think any of them are that memorable. Besides Barai when he's evil, but when he joins the team, he's literally never around except to summon Dragon Caesar. The villains aren't that great, even though I like Bendor and think she's funny. The main problem with the season is definitely the fact that most of it is just filler child episodes, and those are just my least favorite type of episodes. And it is still entertaining in certain spots, and I think the soundtrack is really great. That's the best part of the season. But overall, it's just really generic and boring for the most part. Number 33 is Choiki Sentai Abaranger. I think the season is only slightly better than Zyuohger. I think Zyuohger does some stuff better, especially when it comes to the music. I think the characters are better. I think the Abarangers are the worst team in all of Sentai. But the reason I like it more is just because it's more consistent. It still relies on filler children, but I feel like it's done better where it's recurring characters instead of just new filler children every single episode. I think the world is a lot more interesting, even though they never really got to explore it that much. And the last 4 episodes are really good. And I think just the filler episodes overall are better in Abaranger. So I still don't think it's that good of a season, but it's a little bit better than Zyuohger. Number 32 is Hyakuju Sentai Gaoranger, and I really wanted to like Gaoranger because of how much I liked Wild Force, but the season just ended up being not that good. I think the best part of it is definitely the suits. They really modernized them, and I think the mecha look really cool too. But really, other than that, there really aren't that many positives. I would say most of my enjoyment from the season is just nostalgia I have for Wild Force. The characters are really bad. They're one of the worst teams. The villains are also pretty bad, although Yabai and Suisue are my favorite characters in this season. I really like them. But really the biggest problem with the villains is that there's no main villain. And then the 2 main plot points, the Roki arc and the Gaogod arc, both have their problems. And really I feel like Wild Force is just a better version of the season with an actual compelling main villain with Master Org, and having the Red Ranger have a direct connection to him, and also having the best anniversary episode in any tokusatsu with Forever Red. So I don't really think there's any reason to watch Gaoranger when Wild Force is pretty much just a better version of it. Number 31 is Shuriken Sentai Ninninger. I'm definitely a little bit of a defender of this season. I've made an entire video on it, so if you want to know more about my thoughts, then you should watch that. But really, in short, I just think this is just a really entertaining season. Even if it isn't particularly good, I think all the filler episodes are really enjoyable. I think the cast is bad as characters, but are really fun for the most part. The villains are just terrible. I think they're probably the worst villains in all of Sentai. Just worst version of the Gadoshu from Shinkenger. I wouldn't say this is a good season, but it's just really enjoyable. And most people say this is the worst season, but I would say give it a chance because it's really fun, even if it isn't particularly good. Number 30 is Tenso Sentai Goseiger. It's a pretty average season. It's got some pretty cool moments, but is mostly just boring. The characters are not that great. I think they're one of the weaker teams, but Gosei Knight is really cool. The rotating villain factions is a really cool idea, and Patranger is a really interesting main villain, but I don't think either was executed the best. The worst part of the season is definitely the world building. Gosei World and the Gosei Angels are never explained at all. The season definitely just has the worst selection of filler episodes. There's maybe only one that I like, but there's still some really cool moments, especially with the villain factions in their end games. And the aesthetics are really cool. I think this is probably the best looking season with the suits and the mecha. So it just ends up being a pretty average season. Number 29 is Ninja Sentai Dekaranger, and this is definitely a hot take on my part. I really liked Dekaranger for the first 20 or so episodes where it was really goofy. I thought the yokai were really fun months of the week. I thought the storyteller was a really fun addition. But just when the team split up and it became really serious, that was just a huge tonal shift out of nowhere. And then once the team came back, it kind of just became Zyuohger, where the team was just helping out children. And the storyteller was gone and all the yokai were really generic now. And that sucks because I thought the first 20 episodes were awesome, the funniest Sentai has ever been and probably ever will be, and it just sucks that it kind of just fell off a cliff from there. It's still not terrible overall, but it just really sucks to see how bad this season fell off after the first 20 episodes. Number 28 is QQ Sentai Go 5, and this is probably the baseline Sentai. It's pretty much alright in every facets. I think the cast is really good. I really like all the dynamics they have with each other. The villains are okay, although I think Pierre is the greatest Sentai general, and the suits in Mecha are alright. So it's just kind of an overall average season. I don't really have much to say about it. It's just alright overall. Number 27 is Super Sentai I've, and it's probably the most lighthearted season and is really enjoyable. There really isn't any overarching story or anything, and I think all the I've are funny. This character's not that great, but they're still funny. But I really think the best part of the season is definitely the villains, who aren't evil but are kind of just around to cause chaos, and they're really fun. I think Signal Man is a really great foil for the team and has a lot of funny moments with them. And I really like the soundtrack. So this is just a really fun and goofy season and is really enjoyable for me. Number 26 is Boukenger Sentai Boonboomger. I recently made an entire review on this season since it ended a couple of weeks ago. But in short, I just think this is it's an entertaining season, tries some new things, but overall kind of ends up just being generic. The team is alright, although I wish more things were done with them, especially with Sakito, who just feels like an outsider to the team. Villains are pretty good. I like the Sandseeders, and Spindo's a pretty good main villain, but I don't think he was utilized as much as I'd hoped. The best part of the season is definitely the soundtrack, which is incredible, and I think the suits have really grown on me. I think they're really great suits. So it's just an entertaining season, but especially coming after Dawn Brothers and ToQger, which were really innovative, Boonboomger just felt a little disappointing. Number 25 is Machine Sentai Hurricaneger, and this is probably another hot take because of how much people like Hurricaneger. But I think to me this is just a season of two halves where the first 30 episodes are middling at best and pretty bad at worst, and mostly it's just because I hate Juru, and a lot of the episodes revolve around Juru solving everyone's problems and everyone worshipping Juru. But the last 15 episodes focus more on the relationships between the characters without Juru involving himself in them, and that's just a lot more interesting. And if the whole season was like the last 15 episodes, this would be a top 15 season, no doubt, because I really like the other members besides Juru. And also really like the villains. I think they're some of the best villains, especially Emperor Yodam, who's a really intimidating villain and probably my favorite main villain in all of Sentai. And there's some interesting things with Crystalia and stuff like that. So if this season was just like the last 15 episodes, this would be a great season. But as it is now, I think it's still alright and probably on par with Boonboomger in terms of quality. Number 24 is Kikai Sentai Zyuohger, and this is the first season I saw while I was airing, so it has a special place in my heart. But at the same time, I hated it when it was airing. It was my least favorite season. But that's also because I was hoping for a more grander anniversary season, and that really isn't that type of season. Really, the anniversary aspect is probably the weakest point, with the Sentai Gears being really bad gimmicks, and the anniversary aspect basically just boiling down to the aesthetics. But it's mostly more like a Dekaranger type of season where it's really goofy, and I really like it now after I rewatched it. Even though I don't think the characters are great, I think there's a lot of problems with the story. I really like ToQger, and I like Juran and Magine, and Kaito is fine enough. The villains are just terrible. I think they're the worst villains in all of Sentai, and Stacy just has the most predictable redemption arc ever. I definitely don't hate this season anymore. I think it's a lot of fun, but it certainly is still kind of disappointing because of how underwhelming it is as an anniversary season. But it's still a lot of fun, and I would highly recommend it. Number 23 is Seiju Sentai Gingaman, and it's a pretty good season. It's basically just a better version of Zyuohger with a lot of the plot elements being similar. And really what it boils down to is the Bull Black arc. It's just such a great stretch of episodes, even the ones that don't involve Bull Black. The quality is just so good, and that kind of just carries the entire season. I think the team is alright, and the villains are really cool. I just like how each of the generals has their own specific monsters of the week that have their own designs. And just the monster designs in general, I think this is the best monster designs in any season, and it's just a pretty good season overall. There's really no reason to watch Zyuohger when you have this season. It basically does everything that Zyuohger does but better, maybe except the soundtrack, but the soundtrack is still good here. So it's not a great season, but I think it has great moments, and it's still pretty good. Number 22 is Dobutsu Sentai Zyuohger, and this is mostly a forgettable season. It's this mostly just because of Yamato, who I think is a great Red Ranger and really carries this season, because the other team members are really boring, mostly just stereotypes, and I think that's mostly because we don't know anything about Juland. And Misao is just the worst Sixth Ranger and honestly the worst character in all of Sentai. The villains are alright. I think Genesis is a terrible main villain, but Kuval and Azald are pretty cool generals, and I wish either one of them would have been the main villain. And Bangery is a great rival for Yamato. The Bud stuff was really terribly paced, and in its current state it honestly could have just been cut. And I think the aesthetics in the season are terrible. The suits, besides Jewel World and Jewel Well, look terrible, and the mecha look incredibly ugly. Although I will say some of the monster designs look really cool, as is the music. The music is really good. So while the season is kind of forgettable, Yamato really carries it a lot, and it makes it a pretty good season. Number 21 is Juken Sentai Gekiranger, and this could have been a great season because its story is so good, but its characters just hold it back considerably. All of them are pretty boring, and John is just one of the most annoying characters in all Sentai and my least favorite Red Ranger. I just hate the way he speaks, and really the only character I like is Ken, but he doesn't get much to do. The villains are pretty good. I like Rio, even if he is a generic evil ranger. I think Melee is really annoying, but the story is so good and interesting. That sucks that the characters are so bland and really hold this season back, because it could have been great. Number 20 is Maho Sentai Magiranger, and I think this is a good season, but I still feel kind of disappointed on it because of how much I like Mystic Force, and I was really hoping for the season to be a lot better than Mystic Force, and it is better than Mystic Force, but honestly not by that much. I like the cast, but I don't think they feel as much as a family like Go-Go 5 does, and I don't think this story is very interesting. The villains are kind of generic, besides Wolzard, who is a great villain. The suits look awesome. I really like the capes, and the soundtrack is also great, but I still can't help but feel a little disappointed. Even though the season is good and I like it overall, I feel like it should have been way better than it actually is. Number 19 is Denji Sentai Megaranger, and the best part of the season is just the characters. I think they actually feel like high school students and they're flawed, unlike the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I really like Kubota, he's one of my favorite mentors, and Yusaku is one of my favorite 6 Rangers, and the soundtrack is also awesome. The villains aren't that great. Dr. Hinolar is a pretty generic main villain, although the Neji Rangers are really cool. Like most of the 90s seasons, I think the season has a little too much pointless filler, but I think for the most part it's pretty entertaining, and I feel like this is the only time in Sentai and Kamen Rider where a secret identity plotline is actually done well, and because of it the finale arc is pretty good, and overall it's just a really great season. Number 18 is Tokuso Sentai Dekaranger, and this is a really great episodic season, but I feel like the quality episodes just vary too much. The cast is pretty good, especially Jasmine and Sen. Doggy Kruger is a great mentor, and I think Agent Umbrella works really great in concept as the main villain, but just when he enters the spotlight in the latter half of the season, he just becomes really generic. And like I said, just the quality episodes are all over the place. Some of my least favorite episodes of Sentai are this season, and some of the episodes that I think are the greatest in all Sentai are this season. And all of Hoji's episodes are really great, a funny coincidence. And the soundtrack really fits the theme really well. So even though it's not the most consistent Sentai, I think it works really well because it actually fits the episodic nature that Sentai usually is. So I think it's pretty enjoyable overall. Number 17 is Engine Sentai Gokaiger, and I always think of the season as a spiritual successor to Carranger, but it's different enough, I think, for it not to be considered that. I just think it's a really fun season and still has a little bit more heart than Carranger does. I just like how the team is just normal people that want to fight evil and are not like chosen ones or highly trained like the Go-On Wings. And I like all the characters pretty much, especially the main team and the Go-On Wings. They're dynamic, and how the Go-On Wings eventually become as goofy as the main team. I really like the villains. I think they're really great comedic villains, especially because the main 3 are actually lower ranking officials. I do wish the world building was established more, because it does establish that there are multiple worlds, but we never really explore them that much. But overall, it's just a really fun season. I think the soundtrack is awesome. Filler is awesome. I really like the characters. This is just one of the most enjoyable seasons for me, and one that I look fondly back on a lot of the time. Number 16 is Go-Go Sentai Boukenger. This is a great episodic season. It works so well because each episode could have its own precious, but I never really think it lives up to its potential. I really like the characters. This is one of my favorite teams. Really, the only one I don't like is Natsuki, and I really like Akashi and Eiji especially. The multiple villain factions is a really interesting idea, but I don't think each of them are interesting enough. But episodically, the season works great. I like a lot of the episodes, and even near the end when it focuses more on character moments, it's awesome too. I just don't think it really lived up to its full potential, but what we got was still really great, and one of my favorite seasons to revisit. Number 15 is Nimpu Sentai Hurricaneger. This is a really good season. I like all the Hurricanegers, even if they're a little similar when it comes to personality. And I think the Goreigers were kind of a missed opportunity, because Kabuto kind of got all the cool moments, and Kuuga is kind of just there. But really, the season got way better with the introduction of Shinkenger, who is one of my favorite 6 Rangers. I just really like his personality, and his story was really interesting. I think Talzant is the worst villain in all of Sentai. He literally just sits around and does nothing. But the 7 Dark Spears are probably the best generals, and they really bring up the villains a lot. So this is just a really enjoyable season, and I just like it a lot. Number 14 is Gosei Sentai Dekaranger. This is a great season to go back to because of how good the filler is in this season. And while it isn't too deep, I think it's as interesting enough story and villains that it makes up that it's mostly filler. The Dekarangers are not incredible characters, but I think they're good enough, except for Ko, who is terrible and just an annoying kid. But the villains are really interesting. I like Shadom especially, and the twist of the villains in the end was really great, especially the monsters of the week. I think these are the best monsters of the week in all of Sentai. I just wish their designs weren't as bad and they're as good as the personalities they have. But another great thing about this season is that each character gets their own relationship and kind of gives them more to do, even though Kazu gets shafted and just got some random filler character. And also Master Kaku is a great mentor. But the season is still just really well made. Even if it is a pretty generic 90s Sentai experience, it's just a lot of fun and really great to revisit. Number 13 is Uchu Sentai Kyuranger, and this is a great season. Even though I don't think it reached its full potential, it's still much grander than pretty much any other season besides ToQger. It has a 12-man team, which doesn't work especially well because most of the team is just filler, but it's still a really good cast overall. And the story has inconsistencies, especially when it comes to the time travel aspect, but it's alright overall, and has a lot of fun filler episodes. The villains just aren't that interesting, and even though the scope feels pretty big with a lot of unique locations, all of the season is still just held on Earth, which is just really lame. Another really great thing is just the aesthetics are awesome, all the suits look great, the Seizo blasters are really cool, Q-Tamas are cool, and just all the effects for all the finishers and stuff like that just look awesome. So this is just a really grand and awesome season. I think it's really good. Number 12 is Chojin Sentai Jetman, and this is definitely the most hyped season, probably out of all of them besides Gokaiger, and even I don't think it lives up to the hype, even though I really like this season and it was the first season I ever saw and it really got me into Sentai. It's mostly a generic 90s Sentai experience, but I think it still does a lot of things that are really good, but I also have a little bit of a bias towards it. I think the characters are okay, but I really like the dynamic between Ryuga and Kaori, even though I don't usually like love stuff. I think here it's done really well. I think the villains are really interesting, especially Gray and Tranza, and there's a lot of great filler episodes like the Cup Noodle episode, and the ending is probably the best in all of Sentai, even though logically it makes no sense. As a character moment for Guy, as a full circle moment for his character, it's the perfect ending. So even though I don't think the season is as good as everyone says, not even close, it still means a lot to me because it was the first season I ever saw, and even besides that, I think it's a really solid season. Number 11 is Kaito Sentai Lupinranger versus Keisat Sentai Patranger, and this is definitely a hot take. I feel like this season is the most universally hated aside from Ninninger, but I think this season has a lot of problems still, but I think it has a lot to offer, especially when it comes to the Lupinrangers, who I think are an awesome team. I like all of them. I just think when the difference between the Patrangers and the Lupinrangers is the biggest problem with the season, where the Patrangers are basically just jokes, and obviously the lesser team, the Lupinrangers, who have a sympathetic backstory, and really doesn't make any sense why the Patrangers are even trying to stop them because they've never really done anything wrong. So as like a team versus team season, it's not great, but just as a season in general, it's awesome. Even though I don't think the villains are that great, I just really like the characters. I think the action in the season is just really ahead of its time, the best of its time really, until ToQger or Boonboomger. If you're expecting like a team versus team season, this really will leave you disappointed, but as a season in general, I still think it's really good, especially when it comes to the end. I understand why people don't like it, but I really like it. I think it does a lot of good things. Number 10 is Mirai Sentai Time Ranger, and this is just a great season. It has good moments all around, good filler moments, good story moments, good characters, good villains. It is a little bit too 90s like with too much filler, but it's still really good. I think the team is pretty good, even though Shion is a little boring. I think the other team is pretty good, but the villains are great. I really like Don Del Nero. He actually feels like a sympathetic person, and he really isn't trying to take over the world or anything. He just wants to make money. And just his relationship with him and Geen is really interesting. But also the twist villain near the end, that's probably the best villain in my opinion. Soundtrack is awesome. The opening theme is a little weird, but the rest of the soundtrack is awesome, especially the song that plays in the finale. It's honestly the greatest song out of any Sentai. So the season's just great. It might be some Time Force nostalgia, but I genuinely think this is a great season. Probably has the best villains. This ends up being such a great season. Number 9 is Osama Sentai ToQger. This is such an amazing season because of how ambitious it is, and I really think it delivers on that for the most part. It's bigger than basically any Sentai. The story is incredible, and I think the characters are all great. And it does feel like it's a 2-season series, although I will say it takes a little while to get going. The first season is pretty average, but by the time the second part gets in, it is just incredible and basically solves all the problems of the first part. And I think another great part is just that it upends pretty much any tradition that Sentai has. There isn't a monster of the week every single week. There isn't a mecha battle every single week. So when there is a mecha battle, I feel is really important. I will say the one problem is that there are a lot of repeated storylines, like the people turning on the ToQgers or a fight between Gira and Rackley's. But overall, this is just a great season because of how far it deviates from the rest of Sentai and is a completely serialized experience, basically no filler. ToQger stuff is a little out of place, and I think the CGI environments take a little bit to get used to, but it really allows the season to feel different because you're not just in the same usual Toku locations. So this is just a great season. I think the more time passes, I'll appreciate it more. Right now it's just great because it's a radical departure for pretty much everything else, and it still ends up being a great season. Number 8 is Kishu Sentai Soldier. I just love this season. Even though I don't think it's the greatest, I think it has its problems. I just really like it. I think the characters are great for the most part. I think the villains are really great. I think they're some of my favorite. I really like Cleon and Weiser especially. Eris is an interesting villain, but she just isn't around at all. The monsters of the week are interesting in that they're born from civilians, kind of like Kamen Rider Monster of the Week. And the stuff with Goseiger was interesting, but I feel like it was not done the best and kind of didn't feel as important. And I kind of wish Nada was around for longer than just one episode. I think the world building is awesome. It's probably the best world building besides ToQger, with members of the Ryusoul tribe actually showing up throughout the world. And the designs are really great. I really like the suits. Monster designs are pretty cool. And the music is great. So the season is just awesome. I think it's pretty heartfelt, and it's just a great season. Number 7 is Juden Sentai ToQger, and this is a season that I've really come around on. When I first saw it, I thought it was okay, but I didn't really like it that much. But once I rewatched it, I realized how great it was. I think that's mostly because of the characters. I think it's one of the best teams. Villains are alright, but I think they're pretty good, especially Aigalon. I will say, like, the extra Rangers are a cool idea and concept, but really aren't used that much, so I think they're kind of wasted. But it has a lot of really fun episodes, some interesting story. I think Torin is a really interesting mentor, and the stuff with Daigo and his dad is also interesting. So the season is really popular, and I understand why. It's really fun. Pretty much delivers as being a really great season. Number 6 is Tokime Sentai Go Busters, and this is just a great all-around season. It has interesting characters, villains, and plot, and does some cool things, especially at the same time on-the-ground fight and mecha fights. I really think the Go Busters are the best 3-man team, and Jin and Jay are some of my favorite 6 Rangers. I think the Buddy Roids aren't done that well, because besides Nick and Jay, they really aren't that great. The villains are great, even though there's basically only 2 main villains. Enter is one of my favorite villains. Is just so charismatic and funny, although he does fall off a little bit near the end. And I don't really care that much about Escape. But the season also kind of falls off a little bit near the end after the first fight with Messiah in the virtual world. It kind of just becomes a little bit more generic. The villains aren't as cool, and the season as a whole just gets a little worse. But I think overall the season is really solid. It's just one of the best seasons. Number 5 is Samurai Sentai Shinkenger. This is just a great season. I think it has incredible characters, even if the plot is a little boring. Mostly because of Takeru, because he has such an interesting backstory, and that arc with him near the end is just one of the best story arcs in all Sentai. I think even though the villains are generic, I think they work really well because of how intimidating they are. And Juzo is one of my favorite villains. As well, the aesthetics. The aesthetics are super cool. I think the suits are cool. The origami mecha is cool. And also has one of my favorite soundtracks. I just really like this season. It's awesome, and it's one of my favorites. Number 4 is Bakuyu Sentai Abaranger, and this is a season that handles a lot of tones really well. It can be really goofy, but it can also be really serious. And I think that's reflected in the characters. Like, the main three are pretty goofy, but then you have Asuka, who can be goofy, but also has a serious backstory and is really interesting. And then you have Abaranger, who I think is one of the best 6 Rangers. It's just basically the main villain for a large portion of the season, even though I think his redemption is a little lame. It makes enough sense. Villains are kind of lame. Suits are really cool, especially Abaranger Black and Abaranger has some really great insert themes, and I think the opening theme is one of my favorites. And I think just the best part is how it's able to handle a lot of different tones. It doesn't really feel like out of place ever. It's just a really great Sentai experience overall. Number 3 is Avataro Sentai Dawn Brothers, and this is probably the weirdest feeling Sentai to date, but it's just carried heavily by its characters. They're easily the best team in all Sentai, even with Juro, who is terrible. And even though the story is a little convoluted, it's pretty interesting, and I like the Noto and the Juto and all that stuff. I think it's a little too formulaic. Like, I don't think the Matches of the Week need to be here, and there really didn't need to be a mecha fight, even though the mecha fights are pretty interesting in the season. But it's mostly just a completely absurd season. All the characters are great and really reflect how goofy the season is. Has some really great filler, especially near the end. So I don't think this season is for everyone. It's probably a little too goofy, but for me, it really hit a sweet spot for me and really got me into embracing the goofiness in Sentai. So it's just one of my favorite seasons. Number 2 is Russia Sentai ToQger, and this is just probably the most wholesome and heartfelt season out of them all. And it's able to be goofy while also delivering a serious story when it needs to. And the characters work really well. I think their villains are really interesting. And Akira is just my favorite 6 Ranger, with him being really cool, but that can also lead to funny moments. The imagination theme is really interesting, and I think there's a lot of great Match of the Week designs and filler episodes. I think the worst part is definitely the aesthetics. The suits are terrible, and I think all the mecha look really ugly, but that doesn't really matter. The season is really heartfelt. It's heartwarming. It made me cry in the end. So it's just a great season, one of my favorites. Number 1 is Kaizoku Sentai Gokaiger, and really one of the biggest reasons why this is number 1 is because it actually lived up to the hype and then some. Easily the most hyped up season in my opinion, and it delivers in every facet as an anniversary season, as a season in general. It's just great. The team is really great. Villains are pretty lame, probably the biggest part of the season, but they're fine enough. And just the arc that the Gokaigers go through, from just being regular pirates who don't care about the earth to accepting themselves as the 35th Sentai and sacrificing the treasure to save Earth. It's just great. All the tribute episodes are great. All the filler is really great. Stuff with Bosco is really great. And really it just lived up to the hype as the greatest anniversary season and probably will never be topped ever. It's just an incredible season, easily the best out of all the seasons I've seen. Now I'm going to talk about Abaranger, and I think it ended up being a great show, not just a great parody, but it ends up just being a great show in general, which I wasn't expecting. It's just really funny. Season 1 is definitely way better than Season 2. Season 2 has a lot more problems, but they're both good in their own regard. I just really like the Abaranger, especially Nobuo, and I wish the first season was more episodic and just about the Abarangers fighting in their delusions, because once a story started bringing up and Malshina started invading reality, that's sort of where it lost me, but it still ended up being a really great season. I'd say Season 1 is a top 10 season for me. Season 2 is definitely not as good. I feel like the novelty kind of wore off. I think Luna is a way worse Akiba Blue, even though I think some of the stuff about them changing reality is really funny, and the fact that the writer of the show is just the main villain, that's funny, but it's just not as funny in my opinion. I think a lot of the same jokes were repeated, so Season 2 is a lot more middling, probably around like 18, but I'm just glad that it exists at all. It's super funny, pretty much everything I'd expect out of a Sentai parody, and delivered even some more. So I would say if you're a Sentai fan, you should probably check it out. It's really funny. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to know more in-depth thoughts on my top 5, then I made a video last year about my favorite Sentai seasons, so if you want to know more about my top 5, you can watch that video. As for future videos, I think my next video will be ranking the Kamen Rider logos for April Fools. So thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed. Feedback is always appreciated. Have a great day.